The Split Cherry Tree by Stuart. I don't mind staying after school, I says to Professor Herbert, but I'd rather you'd whip me with a switch and let me go home early. Pa will whip me anyway for getting home 2 hours late. You are too big to whip, says Professor Herbert, and I have to punish you for climbing up that cherry tree. You boys knew better than that. The other 5 boys have paid their $1 each. You have been the only who has not helped pay for the tree. Can't you borrow $1? I can't, I says. I'll have to take the punishment. I wish it would be quicker punishment. I wouldn't mind. Professor Herbert stood and looked at me. He was a big man. He wore a gray suit of clothes. The suit matched his gray hair. You don't know my father, I says to Professor Herbert. He might be called a little old-fashioned. He makes us mind him until we're 21 years old. He believes if you spare the rod, you spoil the child. I'll never be able to make him understand about the cherry tree. I'm the first of my people to go to high school. You must take the punishment, says Professor Herbert. You must stay 2 hours after school today and 2 hours after school tomorrow. I'm allowing you 25 cents an hour. That is good money for a high school student. You can sweep the schoolhouse floor, wash the blackboards, and clean windows. I'll pay the $1 for you. I couldn't ask Professor Herbert to loan me $1. He never offered to loan it to me. I had to stay and help the janitor and work out my fine at $1 an hour. I thought as I swept the floor, what lie can I tell him when I go home? Why did we ever climb that cherry tree and break it down for anyway? Why did we run crazy over the hills away from the crowd? Why did we do all of this? 6 of us climbed up in a little cherry tree after one little lizard. Why did the tree split and fall with us? It should have been a stronger tree. Why did F. Crabtree just happen to be below us, plowing, and catch us in his cherry tree? Why wasn't he a better man than to charge us $6 for the tree? It was 6 o'clock when I left the schoolhouse. I had 6 miles to walk home. It would be after 7 when I got home. I had all my work to do when I got home. It took Pa and I both to do this work. 7 cows to milk, 19 head of cattle to feed, 4 mules, 25 hogs, firewood and stove wood to cut, and water to draw from the well. He would be doing it when I got home. He would be mad and wondering what was keeping me. I hurried home. I would run under the dark, leafless trees. I would walk fast uphill. I would run down the hill. The ground was freezing. I had to hurry. I had to run. I reached the long ridge that led to our cow pasture. I ran along this ridge. The wind dried the sweat on my face. I ran across the pasture to the house. I threw down my books in the chipyard. I ran to the barn to spread fodder on the ground for the cattle. I didn't take time to change clean school clothes for my old work clothes. I ran out to the barn. I saw Pa spreading fodder on the ground to the cattle. That was my job. I ran up to the fence. I says, "Leave that for me, Pa. I'll do it. I'm just a little late." "I see you are," says Pa. He turned and looked at me. His eyes danced fire. "What in the world has kept you so? Whyn't you been here to help me with this work? Make a gentleman out in one boy in the family, and this is what you get? Send you to high school, and you get too ornery for the I never said anything. I didn't want to tell why I was late from school. Pa stopped scattering the bundles of fodder. He looked at me. He says, "Why are you getting in here this time of night? You tell me or I'll take the hickory whittle to you right here." I says, "I had to stay after school." I couldn't lie to Pa. He'd go to school and find out why I had to stay. If I lied to him, it would be too bad for me. "Why did you have to stay after school?" says Pa. "After school," says Pa. I says, "Our biology class went on a field trip today. 6 of us boys broke down a cherry tree. We had to give $1 apiece to pay for the tree. I didn't have the $1. Professor Herbert is making me work out my $1 an hour. I had to stay in this afternoon. I'll have to stay in tomorrow afternoon." "Are you telling me the truth?" says Pa. "I'm telling you the truth," I says. "Go and see for yourself." "That's just what I'll do in the morning," says Pa. "Just whose cherry tree did you break down?" "Abe Crabtree's cherry tree." "What was you doing clear out in Abe Crabtree's place?" says Pa. "He lives 4 miles from the county high school. Don't they teach you no books at that high school? Do they out and gad over the hillsides? If that's all they'll do, I'll keep you at home. Dave, I got work here for you to do." "Pa," I says, "spring is just getting here. We take a subject in school where we have to have bugs, snakes, flowers, lizards, frogs, and plants. It is biology. It was a pretty day today. We went out to find a few of these. 6 of us boys saw a lizard at the same time running on a cherry tree. We all went up the tree to get it. We broke the tree down. It split at the forks. Abe Crabtree was plowing down below us. He ran up the hill and got our names. The other boys gave their $1 apiece. I didn't have mine. Professor Herbert put mine in for me. I have to work it out at school." "Poor man's son, huh?" says Pa. "I'll attend to that myself in the morning. I'll take care of him. He ain't from this county nohow. I'll go down there in the morning and see him. Letting you leave your books and gallivant all over the hills. What kind of a school is it nohow? Didn't do that my son when I's a little shaver in school. All fair to like to." "Pa, please don't go down there," I says. "Just let me have 50 cents and pay the rest of my fine. I don't want you to go down there. I don't want you to start anything with Professor Herbert." "Ashamed of your old pap, are you, Dave?" says Pa. "After the way I've worked to raise you, trying to send you to school so you can make a better living than I've made. I'll straighten this thing out myself. I'll take care of Professor Herbert myself. He ain't got no right to keep you in and let the other boys off just because they've got the money. I'm a poor man. A bullet will go in a professor same as it will any man. It will go in a rich man same as it will a poor man. Now, you get into this work before I take one of these withers and cut the shirts offen your back." I thought once I'd run through the woods above the barn just as hard as I could go. I thought I'd leave high school and home forever. Pa could not catch me. I'd get away. I couldn't go back to school with him. He'd have a gun, and maybe he'd shoot Professor Herbert. It was hard to tell what he would do. I could tell Pa that school had changed in the hills from the way it was when he was a boy, but he wouldn't understand. I could tell him we studied frogs, birds, snakes, lizards, flowers, insects, but Pa wouldn't understand. If I did run away from home, it wouldn't matter to Pa. He would see Professor Herbert anyway. He would think that high school and Professor Herbert had run me away from home. There was no need to run away. I'd just have to stay, finish foddering the cattle, and go to school with Pa the next morning. I would take a bundle of fodder, remove the hickory with band from around it and scatter it on rocks, clumps of green briars and brush so the cattle wouldn't tramp it under their feet. I would lean it up against the oak trees and the rocks in the pasture just above our pig pen on the hill. The fodder was cold and frosty where it had set out in the stacks. I would carry bundles of the fodder from the stack until I had spread out a bundle for each steer. Pa went to the barn to feed the mules and throw corn in the pen to the hogs. The moon shone bright in the cold March sky. I finished my work by moonlight. Professor Herbert really didn't know how much work I had to do at home. If he had known, he would not have kept me after school. He would have loaned me $1 to have paid my part on the cherry tree. He had never lived in the hills. He didn't know the way the hill boys had to work so that they could go to school. Now he was teaching in a county high school where all the boys who attended were from hill farms. After I'd finished I went to the house and ate my supper. Pa and Mom had eaten. My supper was getting cold. I heard Pa and Mom talking in the front room. Pa was telling Mom about me staying in after school. I had to do all the milking tonight, chop the wood myself. It's too hard on me after I've turned ground all day. I'm going to take a day off tomorrow and see if I can't remedy things a little. I'll go down to that high school tomorrow. I won't be a very good scholar for Professor Herbert nohow. He won't keep me in after school. I'll take a different kind of lesson down there and make him acquainted with it. Now, Luster, says Mom, you just stay away from there. Don't cause a lot of trouble. You can be jailed for a trick like that. You'll get the law after you. You just go down there and show off and plague your own Dave to death in front of all the scholars. Plague or no plague, says Pa, he don't take into consideration what all I have to do here, does he? I'll show him. It ain't right to keep one boy in and let the rest go scot-free. My boy's as good as the rest, ain't he? A bullet will make a hole in a schoolteacher, same as it will anybody else. You can't do me that way and get by with it. And I'll plug 'em first. I aim to go down there bright and early in the morning and get all this straight. I aim to see about bug learning and this running all over God's creation, hunting snakes, lizards, and frogs, ransacking the country and going through cherry orchards and breaking the trees down after lizards. Old F. Crabtree ought to have poured the hot lead into him instead of charging $6 for the tree. He ought to have got old Herbert first. The first one. I ate my supper. I slipped upstairs and lit the lamp. I tried to forget the whole thing. I studied plane geometry. Then I studied my biology lesson. I could hardly study for thinking about Pa. He'll go to school with me in the morning. He'll take a gun for Professor Herbert. What will Professor Herbert think of me? I'll tell him when Pa leaves that I couldn't help it, but Pa might shoot him. I hate to go with Pa. Maybe he'll cool off about it tonight and not go in the morning. Pa got up at 4 o'clock. He built a fire in the stove. Then he built a fire in the fireplace. He got Mom up to get breakfast. Then he got me up to help feed and milk. By the time we had our work done at the barn, Mom had breakfast ready for us. We ate our breakfast. Daylight came, and we could see the bare oak trees covered white with frost. The hills were white with frost. A cold wind was blowing. The sky was clear. The sun would soon come out and melt the frost. The afternoon would be warm with sunshine, and the frozen ground would thaw. There would be mud on the hills again. Water would then run down the little ditches on the hills. Now, Dave, says Pa, let's get ready for school. I aim to go with you this morning and look into bug learning, frog learning, lizard and snake learning, and breaking down cherry trees. I don't like no such a foolish way of learning myself. Pa hadn't forgot. I'd have to take him to school with me. He would take me to school with him. We were going early. I was glad we were going early. If Pa pulled a gun on Professor Herbert, there wouldn't be so many of my classmates there to see him. I knew that Pa wouldn't be at home in the high school. He wore overalls, big boots, a blue shirt, and a sheepskin coat, and a slouched black hat gone to seed at the top. He put his gun in its holster. We started trudging toward the high school across the hill. It was early when we got to the county high school. Professor Herbert had just got there. I just thought as we walked up the steps into the schoolhouse, maybe Pa will find out Professor Herbert is a good man. He just doesn't know him, just like I felt toward the Lambert boys across the hill. I didn't like them until I'd seen them and talked to them. After I went to school with them and talked to them, I liked them and we were friends. It's a lot in knowing the other fellow. "You're the professor here, ain't you?" says Pa. "Yes," says Professor Herbert. "And you are Dave's father?" "Yes," says Pa, pulling out his gun and laying it on the seat in Professor Herbert's office. Professor Herbert's eyes got big behind his black-rimmed glasses when he saw Pa's gun. Color came into his pale cheeks. "Just a few things about this school I want to know," says Pa. "I'm trying to make a scholar out'n Dave. He's the only one out'n 11 young'uns I've sent to high school. Here he comes in late and leaves me all the work to do. He said you hunting yesterday and broke a cherry tree down. He had to stay 2 hours after school yesterday and work out money to pay on that cherry tree. Is that right?" "Why," says Professor Herbert, "I guess it is." He looked at Pa's gun. "Well," says Pa, this ain't no high school. It's a bug school, a lizard school, a snake school. It ain't no school nohow." "Why did you bring that gun?" says Professor Herbert to Pa. "You see that little hole?" says Pa as he picked up the long blue and put his finger on the end of the barrel. "A bullet can come out in that little hole that will kill a schoolteacher same as it will any other man. It will kill a rich man same as a poor man. It will kill a man. But after I come in and saw you, I knowed I wouldn't need it. This small of mine could do you up in a few minutes." Pa stood there, big, hard, brown-skinned, and mighty beside of Professor Herbert. I didn't know Pa was so much bigger and harder. I'd never seen Pa in a schoolhouse before. Herbert, he'd always looked big before to me. He didn't look big standing beside of Pa. "I was only doing my duty," says Professor Herbert, "Mr. Sexton, and following the course of study the state provided us with." "Course of study," says Pa. "Course of study," says Pa. "What study? Bug study? Varmint study? Taking young'uns to the woods and their poor old ma's and pa's at home a-slavin' to keep 'em in school and give 'em an education? You know that's dangerous, too, putting a lot of boys and girls out together like that?" Students' schoolhouse now. Professor Herbert says, "Close the door, Dave, so others won't hear." I walked over and closed the door. I was shaking like a leaf in the wind. I thought Pa was going to hit Professor Herbert every minute. He was doing all the talking. His face was getting red. The red color was coming through the brown, weather-beaten skin on Pa's face. "I was right with these students," said Professor Herbert. "I know what they got into and what they didn't. I didn't send one of the other teachers with them on this field trip. I went myself. Yes, I took the boys and girls together. Not. It just don't look good to me," says Pa. "A-taking all this swarm of young'uns out to pillage the whole district, breaking down cherry trees, keeping boys in after school." "What else could I have done with Dave, Mr. Sexton?" says Professor Herbert. "The boys didn't business all climbing that cherry tree after one lizard. One boy could have gone up the tree and got it. The farmer charged us $6. It was a little steep, I think, but we had it to pay. Must I make 5 boys a pay and let your boy off? He said he didn't have the dollar and couldn't get it. So I put it in for him. I'm letting him work it out. He's not working for me. He's working for the school. I just don't know what you could have done with him, says Pa. Only a wrapped him with a wife. That's what he needed. He's too, says Professor Herbert, pointing at me. He's a man in size. He's not too big for me to whip, says Pa. They ain't too big until they're over 21. It just don't look fair to me. Work one and let the rest out because they got the money. I don't see what bugs has to do with the high school. It don't look good to me nohow. Pa picked up his gun and put it back in its holster. The red color left Professor Herbert's face. He talked more to Pa. Pa softened a little. It looked funny to see Pa in the high school building. It was the first time he'd ever been there. We were not only hunting snakes, toads, flowers, butterflies, lizards, says Professor Herbert, but, Mr. Sexton, I was hunting dry timothy grass to put in an incubator and raise some protozoa. I don't know what that is, says Pa. The incubator is the newfangled way of cheating the hens and raising chickens. I ain't so sure about the breed of chickens you mentioned. You've heard of germs, Mr. Sexton, haven't you? Says Professor Herbert. Just call me Luster if you don't mind, says Pa, very casual-like. All right, Luster. You've heard of germs, haven't you? Yes, says Pa, but I don't believe it. I'm 65 years old and I ain't seen one yet. You can't see them with your naked eye, says Professor Herbert. Just keep that gun in the holster and stay with me in the high school today. I have a few things I want to show you. That scum on your teeth has germs in it. What? Says Pa. You mean to tell me I got germs on my teeth? Yes, says Professor Herbert. The same kind as we might be able to find in a living black snake if we dissect it. I don't mean to dispute your word, says Pa, but I don't believe it. I don't believe I have germs on my teeth. Stay with me today and I'll show you. I want to take you through the school anyway. School has changed a lot in the hills since you went to school. I don't guess we had high schools in this county when you went to school? No, says Pa, just reading, writing, and ciphering. We didn't have all this bug learning, frog learning on your teeth and in the middle of black snakes. The world's a-changin'. It is, says Professor Herbert, and we hope all for the better. Boys like your own there are going to help change it. He's your boy. He knows all of what I've told you. You stay with me today. I'll sure stay with you, says Pa. I want to see the germs off in my teeth. I just want to see a germ. I've never seen one in my life. Seeing is believing. Pap Alice told me. Pa walks out of the office with Professor Herbert. I just hoped Professor Herbert didn't have Pa arrested from... Pa's gun has always been a friend to him when he goes to settle disputes. The bell rang. School took up. I saw the students when they marched in the schoolhouse look at Pa. They would grin and punch each other. Pa just stood and watched them pass in at the schoolhouse door. 2 long lines marched in the house. The boys and girls were clean and well dressed. Pa stood over in the schoolyard under a leafless elm, in his sheepskin coat, his big boots laced in front with buckskin, and his heavy socks stuck above his boot tops. Pa's overall legs were baggy and wrinkled between his coat. His blue work shirt showed at the collar. His big black hat showed his gray-streaked black hair. His face was hard and weather-tanned to the color of a ripe fodder blade. His hands were big and gnarled like the roots of the elm tree he stood beside. When in class, I saw Pa and Professor Herbert going around over the schoolhouse. I was in my geometry class when Pa and Professor Herbert came in the room. We were explaining our propositions on the blackboard. Professor Herbert and Pa just quietly came in and sat down for a while. I heard Fred Watts whisper to Glenn Armstrong, "Who's that old man? Lord, he's a rough-looking scamp." Glenn whispered back, "I think he's Dave's pap." The students in geometry looked at Pa. They must have wondered what he was doing in school. Before the class was over, Pa and Professor Herbert got up and went out. I saw them together down on the playground. Professor Herbert was explaining to Pa. I could see the prints of Pa's gun under his coat when he walked around. At noon in the high school cafeteria, Professor Herbert sat together at the little table where Professor Herbert always ate by himself. They ate together. The students watched the way Pa ate. He ate with his knife instead of his fork. A lot of the students felt sorry for me after they found out he was my father. They didn't have to feel sorry for me. I wasn't ashamed of Pa after I found out he wasn't going to shoot Professor Herbert. I was glad they had made friends. I wasn't ashamed of Pa. I wouldn't be as long as he behaved. He would find out about the high school as I had found out about the Lambert boys across the hill. Noon, when we went to biology, Pa was in the class. He was sitting on one of the high stools beside the microscope. We went ahead with our work just as if Pa wasn't in the class. I saw Pa take his knife and scrape tartar from one of his teeth. Professor Herbert put it on the lens and adjusted the microscope for Pa. He adjusted it and worked a while. Then he says, "Now, Luster, look. Put your eye right down to the light. Squint the other eye." Pa put his head down and did as Professor Herbert said. "I see 'em," says Pa. "Who'd ever thought that? Right on a body's teeth, right in a body's mouth. You're right certain they ain't no fake to this, Professor Herbert." "No, Luster," says Professor Herbert. "It's there. That's the germ. Germs live in a world we must use the microscope. There are millions of them in our bodies. Some are harmful, others are helpful." Pa holds his face down and looks through the microscope. We stop and watch Pa. He sits upon the tall stool. His knees are against the table. His legs are long behind when he bends over. The handle of his gun shows. Professor Herbert pulls his coat down quickly. "Oh, yes," says Pa. He gets up and pulls his coat down. Pa's face gets a little red. He knows about his gun, and he knows he doesn't have any use for it in high school. We have a big black snake over here we caught yesterday," says Professor Herbert. "We'll chloroform him and dissect him and show you he has germs in his body too." "Don't do it," says Pa. "I believe you. I just don't want to see you kill the black snake. I never kill. They are good mousers and a lot of help to us on the farm. I like black snakes. I just hate to see people kill 'em. I don't allow 'em killed on my place." The students look at Pa. They seemed to like him better after he said that. Pa with a gun in his pocket, but a tender heart, his ribs for snakes, but not for man. Pa won't whip a mule at home. He won't whip his cattle. "Man can defend himself," says Pa, "but cattle and mules can't. We have the drop on 'em. Ain't nothing to a man that'll beat a good pullin' mule. He ain't got the right kind of heart." Professor Herbert took Pa through the laboratory. He showed him the different kinds of work we were doing. He showed him our equipment. They stood and talked while we worked. Then they walked out together. They talked louder When our biology class was over, I walked out of the room. It was our last class for the day. I would have to take my broom and sweep 2 hours to finish paying for the split cherry tree. I just wondered if Pa would want me to stay. He was standing in the hallway, watching the students march out, lost among us. He looked like a leaf turned brown on the tree, among the treetop filled with growing leaves. I got my broom and started to sweep. Professor Herbert walked up and says, "I'm going to let you do that some other time. You can go home with your father. He's waiting out there. I laid my broom down, got my books, and went down the steps. Pa says, "Ain't you got 2 hours of sweeping yet to do?" I says, "Professor Herbert said I could do it some other time. He said for me to go home with you." "No," says Pa, "you ain't going to do it. He's a good man. School has changed from my day and time. I'm a dead leaf, Dave. I'm behind. I don't belong here. If he'll let me, I'll get a broom and we'll both sweep 1 hour. That pays your debt. I'll help you pay it. I'll ask him and see if he won't let me help you." "I'm going to cancel the debt," says Professor Herbert. "I just wanted you to understand, Luster." "I understand," says Pa, "and since I understand, he must pay his debt for the tree, and I'm going to help him." "Don't do that," says Professor Herbert. It's all on me." "We don't do things like that," says Pa. "We're just and honest people. We don't want something for nothing. Professor Herbert, you're wrong now, and I'm right. You'll have to listen to me. I've learned a lot from you. My boy must go on. The world has left changed while I've raised my family and plowed the hills. I'm a just and honest man. I don't skip debts. I ain't learned 'em to do that. I ain't got much learning myself, but I do know right from wrong after I see through a thing." Professor Herbert went home. Pa and stayed and swept 1 hour. It looked funny to see Pa use a broom. He never used one at home. Mom used the broom. Pa used the plow. Pa did hard work. Pa says, "I can't sweep. Darned if I can. Look at the streaks of dirt I leave on the floor. Seems like no work at all for me. Brooms is too light or something. I'll just do the best I can, Dave. I've been wrong about the school." I says, "Did you know Professor Herbert can get a warrant out for you for bringing your pistol to school and showing it in his office? They can railroad you for that." "All right, that's all made right," says Pa. "I've made that right. Professor Herbert ain't going to take it to court. He likes me. I like him. We just had to get together. He had the remedies. He showed me. You must go on to school. I am as strong a man as ever come out in the hills for my years and the hard work I've done. Fine, Dave. I'm a little man. Your hands will be softer than mine. Your clothes will be better. You'll always look cleaner than your old pap. Just remember, Dave, to pay your debts and be honest. Just be kind to animals and don't bother snakes. That's all I got against the school. Putting black snakes to sleep and cutting 'em open." It was late when we got home. Stars were in the sky. The moon was up. The ground was frozen. Pa took his time going home. I couldn't run like I did the night before. It was 10 o'clock before we got the work finished. Eaten. Pa sat before the fire and told Mom he was going to take her and show her a germ sometime. Mom hadn't seen one either. Pa told her about the high school and the fine man Professor Herbert was. He told Mom about the strange school across the hill and how different it was in their day and time.